The crack of a gunshot shattered the morning stillness as Abigail Turner frantically ducked beneath her weathered kitchen table, clutching her trembling hands to her ears. It wasn't the first time her husband, Edwin, had fired his pistol inside their modest homestead, but today the shot was accompanied by his thunderous voice declaring he'd had enough of this godforsaken wasteland. Montana Territory, 1878. The promise of free land and a fresh start had lured them west 4 years ago, but the harsh realities of frontier life had slowly eaten away at Edwin's resolve like rust on an abandoned plow. The man Abigail had married in Pennsylvania was long gone, replaced by a bitter shell who drank away what little money they managed to earn from their struggling farm. "I ain't cut out for this life, Abby," Edwin slurred, the whiskey on his breath filling the small cabin as he stuffed his few belongings into a worn leather satchel. "That mining outfit in Idaho's hiring. Said they'd take me on without question." "Edwin, please," Abigail pleaded, her honey-brown hair falling loose from its pins as she reached for his arm. "Winter's coming. We can try again in the spring. The crops might," he yanked away from her touch. "Crops? What crops? Ain't nothing but dust and disappointment out there. Been 4 years of breaking my back for nothing." Abigail fought back tears. At 26, she had already weathered more hardship than many twice her age. The daughter of a schoolteacher, she'd been raised with books and dreams of adventure, not the calluses and constant fear of starvation that had become her daily companions. "What about me?" she whispered, though she already knew the answer from the distant look in his bloodshot eyes. Edwin paused at the door, his shoulders slumping slightly. For a moment, Abigail thought she glimpsed the man she had once loved, but then his jaw hardened. "You wanted this life more than I did. Always talking about the big sky and building something of our own." He tossed a small leather pouch onto the table. The hollow thud told her there was little inside. "That's all I got. Should last you till you come to your senses and head back east to your folks." Before she could respond, he was gone, the door banging shut behind him. Through the small window, she watched him mount their only horse, the mare she'd raised from a foal, and ride away without a backward glance. Abigail stood frozen in the center of their one-room cabin, listening as the hoofbeats faded into the distance. Only then did she allow herself to sink to the floor and give in to the sobs that had been building in her chest. Night fell quickly, bringing with it a bitter cold that seeped through the cabin's poorly chinked logs. Abigail had managed to build a meager fire, but without proper firewood, it wouldn't last until morning. Edwin had been supposed to chop more wood yesterday, but he'd gone to town instead, returning drunk and argumentative. She opened the pouch he'd left. $3.17. Not even enough to buy passage on the eastbound stage, let alone survive the approaching winter. Her parents' farm in Pennsylvania had been sold after their deaths 2 years ago, a fact Edwin conveniently seemed to have forgotten. There was nothing and no one left for her in the East. The pantry was nearly as empty as her purse, a small sack of flour, some beans, a few potatoes sprouting eyes, and less than half a jar of preserved peaches she'd put up in summer. At best, she might stretch it 2 weeks with careful rationing. As the reality of her situation sank in, Abigail's despair gave way to a quiet determination. She would not perish here alone. Somehow, she would survive. The morning dawned clear and cold, frost glittering on the unkempt fields surrounding the cabin. Abigail had barely slept, her mind racing with plans and fears in equal measure. She dressed in her warmest clothes, a woolen skirt, flannel blouse, and the heavy shawl her mother had knitted as a wedding gift, and stepped outside to assess what resources remained to her. The chicken coop yielded 3 eggs, a small blessing. The vegetable garden Edwin had deemed a waste of time had produced enough for her to store some root vegetables in the small root cellar. It wasn't much, but it was something. The real problem would be firewood and meat for the winter ahead. She was examining Edwin's abandoned axe, wondering if her slight frame could generate enough force to split logs, when the distant sound of hoofbeats made her heart leap into her throat. Had Edwin changed his mind? The mixture of hope and dread that flooded her was confusing enough that she didn't immediately retreat inside. Instead of Edwin, however, a stranger appeared on the horizon. A tall man astride a magnificent chestnut horse, moving at an unhurried pace toward her property. Abigail quickly tucked the axe behind her skirts, wary of appearing vulnerable to an unknown rider. As he drew closer, she could make out more details: broad shoulders beneath a worn leather duster, a tan Stetson pulled low over his face, and the unmistakable shape of a rifle in his saddle holster. A cowboy, by the look of him, though he rode alone. The man reined his horse to stop a respectful distance from where she stood. "Morning, madam," he called, his voice deep but not threatening. He removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer sky. "Name's Adam Caldwell. Don't mean to intrude, but I'm looking for the Turner place. Would that be here?" Abigail clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "It is. I'm Mrs. Turner. What business do you have here, Mr. Caldwell?" The man Adam shifted slightly in his saddle. "I work for the Bar Cross Ranch, about 10 miles east. Your husband Edwin made an arrangement with my boss, Mr. Harrington, a few weeks back. Said he'd sell us your spare horse for winter roundup." A cold knot formed in Abigail's stomach. "I'm afraid Mr. Turner has departed for Idaho. Yesterday. And he took our only horse with him." Adam's brow furrowed, creating lines that suggested he spent most of his days squinting beneath the western sun. "Idaho? That's so." He seemed genuinely surprised. "Mr. Harrington paid $20 in advance. Your husband signed a bill of sale."
$20.
Enough to see her through the worst of winter, if she was careful. Money Edwin had pocketed without a word to her. "I'm sorry, Mr. Caldwell," she said, struggling to keep her voice steady. "I was unaware of any such transaction. As you can see, there's no horse to deliver." Adam dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who spent more time on horseback than on foot. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30 or so, with the lean, muscular build of someone accustomed to hard physical labor. "No need to apologize, Mrs. Turner. Ain't your fault." He glanced around the property, taking in the untended fields, the low woodpile, and the general state of disrepair. His expression remained neutral, but Abigail felt the heat of shame color her cheeks nonetheless. "I can speak to Mr. Harrington about the money," she offered, though the thought of parting with cash she didn't even have yet made her stomach clench with anxiety. Adam shook his head. "That'll be between him and your husband." He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. "Forgive my forwardness, madam, but are you planning to manage this place alone?" The question, though simply stated, laid bare the precariousness of her position. Abigail lifted her chin slightly. "I'm considering my options, Mr. Caldwell." He nodded, his eyes moving to the axe she hadn't quite managed to hide. "That's a two-man saw leaning against your barn. And from the look of your woodpile, you're about 3 cords shy of what you'll need before spring thaw." Abigail felt a flare of defiance. "I'm stronger than I look." The corner of Adam's mouth twitched in what might have been the beginning of a smile. "No doubt, Mrs. Turner. But there's strong, and then there's practical." He settled his hat back on his head. "I'd best get back to the ranch. Mr. Harrington will want to know about this development." As he turned to remount his horse, Abigail felt a surge of panic at the thought of being alone again. "Mr. Caldwell?" He paused, one foot in the stirrup. "Yes, madam." "Is there? That is, would your employer have any work available? Even temporary positions?" The words tumbled out before pride could stop them. "I can cook, clean, mend. I'm a quick learner." Adam studied her for a long moment. "Ranch works hard, Mrs. Turner, especially as winter sets in. And the boss doesn't typically hire women, except for the main house." Her hopes sank, but she nodded her understanding. However, he continued, Mrs. Harrington has been talking about needing help with the cooking. They're expecting extra hands for the winter roundup. He mounted his horse with practiced ease. I'll mention it when I report back. Thank you, Abigail said, the words inadequate for the lifeline he had just extended. Adam tipped his hat. In meantime, if you're amenable, I could stop by on my day off. Help you get that situation sorted. Abigail hesitated. Accepting help from a strange man could be seen as improper, but freezing to death out of propriety seemed the greater foolishness. I would appreciate that very much, she said finally. But I insist on compensating you for your time. Adam's eyes crinkled at the corners. We can discuss terms when I return. Day after tomorrow, if that suits. After he rode away, Abigail stood watching the horizon long after he'd disappeared from view. For the first time since Edwin's departure, she felt something other than despair. It wasn't hope, not quite yet, but perhaps its distant cousin possibility. True to his word, Adam Caldwell returned 2 days later. Abigail had spent the intervening time taking inventory of her situation and making what preparations she could. She'd gathered the last vegetables from the garden, turned the soil for spring planting, and even managed to split a few smaller logs, though the effort had left her hands blistered and her back aching. She was collecting eggs from the chicken coop when the sound of an approaching wagon caught her attention. Adam was driving a team of sturdy workhorses, pulling a wagon loaded with firewood. He wasn't alone this time. A younger man sat beside him on the bench. Mrs. Turner, Adam called as he brought the wagon to a halt. Hope we're not too early. This here is Billy, one of the hands from Barcross. The younger man, barely out of his teens with a shock of red hair poking out from under his hat, nodded respectfully. Madam. You're right on time, Abigail replied, setting down her basket of eggs and approaching the wagon. But I wasn't expecting the wood. Adam jumped down from the wagon. Figured we could kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We were clearing some land for the boss anyway. No sense letting good timber go to waste. It was a kind fiction and they both knew it. The neatly cut logs in the wagon hadn't come from land clearing. They had been deliberately chopped and loaded for her benefit. Mr. Harrington approved this? She asked, a note of skepticism in her voice. Adam's eyes met hers steadily. Let's just say what he doesn't know won't hurt him. Or us. For the next several hours, Adam and Billy worked tirelessly, splitting logs and stacking them neatly along the north side of her cabin where they would be protected from the worst of the winter snows. Abigail insisted on helping, despite Adam's initial protests, and found herself assigned to stacking duty while the men handled the heavier work of splitting. By midday, they had made significant progress, and Abigail called a halt to provide the meal she had prepared in anticipation of their arrival, a hearty stew made with the last of her preserved vegetables and a rabbit she'd managed to snare the day before, along with fresh biscuits. This is mighty fine eating, Mrs. Turner, Billy said between enthusiastic mouthfuls. Best meal I've had since leaving my ma's table in Missouri. Adam nodded in agreement, though he ate with more restraint than his young companion. You've got a real talent in the kitchen, madam. Abigail felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire in her stove. It had been a long time since anyone had appreciated her efforts. Edwin had gradually stopped noticing such things, eventually treating meals as merely fuel to be consumed without comment. I spoke with Mrs. Harrington about the cooking position, Adam said as they finished eating. She's interested in meeting you. Said she could use the help with all the extra mouths to feed during roundup. Hope fluttered in Abigail's chest. When would she like me to come? I can take you tomorrow if that suits. It'd be a few weeks' work to start, with the possibility of something more permanent if you both find it agreeable. Abigail's mind raced with the practicalities. What about my place? The chickens. Bring them along, Billy piped up. We got a coop at the ranch. No one mind a few more layers. Adam shot the younger man a look, but then nodded. Billy's right. No sense leaving them to fend for themselves. As for your cabin, well, it'll be here when roundup's done. You can decide then if you want to come back or make other arrangements. The decision should have required more consideration, but Abigail knew there was really only one choice. Staying meant certain hardship, if not worse. The ranch offered work, shelter, and perhaps most importantly, human connection during the isolating winter months ahead. "I'll be ready tomorrow," she said firmly. After the men departed, having completed enough wood chopping to last through the harshest winter, Abigail spent the evening packing her few possessions. Clothes, her mother's Bible, the quilt from her parents' home, a small box of letters and keepsakes. Her life reduced to what could fit in a single trunk and a few burlap sacks. As she worked, she fought against a rising tide of emotions. This small cabin, for all its shortcomings, had been her home. She had arrived 4 years ago full of hope and determination, certain that she and Edwin would build a life worthy of the sacrifices they had made to come west. Now she was leaving with little more than she had brought, her dreams of a thriving homestead abandoned like so much else. Yet beneath the melancholy ran a current of something else, a stubborn, resilient hope that perhaps this was not an ending but a new beginning. The kind Edwin had never had the courage to embrace. The following morning dawned bright and cold, with the promise of snow hanging in the air. Abigail was awake before first light, making final preparations. She had decided to leave most of the furniture, the crude table Edwin had built, the chairs, the straw-filled mattress, taking only what was truly hers. When Adam arrived with the wagon, she was ready, standing on the porch with her trunk and the crate of clucking hens at her feet. She had dressed in her best skirt and blouse, her hair neatly pinned beneath her bonnet, determined to make a good impression on Mrs. Harrington. "You travel light," Adam observed as he loaded her trunk into the wagon. "I've learned that possessions can be a burden as much as a comfort," she replied, helping him secure the chicken crate. Adam's eyes held a question, but he didn't press. "It's about 2 hours to the ranch. Road gets a bit rough in places." Abigail cast one final glance at the cabin as Adam helped her onto the wagon seat. 4 years of her life stood silent in the morning light, windows like empty eyes watching her departure. Unlike Edwin, she allowed herself a moment to say goodbye properly, to acknowledge both the dreams and disappointments contained within those walls. "Ready?" Adam asked, his voice gentle. She nodded, turning away from the past. "Yes, I believe I am." The journey to Bar Cross Ranch took them through rolling hills covered with prairie grass turned golden in the autumn sun. Adam pointed out landmarks along the way, a particular rock formation, a creek that ran strong even in the driest summers, the distant mountains that marked the territory's western border. "How long have you worked for the Harringtons?" Abigail asked, genuinely curious about the man beside her. "Going on 8 years now," Adam replied, his hands steady on the reins. "Started as a regular hand, worked my way up to foreman about 3 years back." "You must enjoy the work to have stayed so long." A small smile played at the corners of his mouth. "It suits me. I like the rhythm of ranch life, the seasons, the cattle, knowing my purpose each day when I wake up." He glanced at her. "What about you? Did you always want to be a homesteader?" Abigail considered the question. "Not specifically. I wanted adventure, I suppose. To see what lay beyond the horizon." She laughed softly. "My father was convinced I'd been born with wanderlust in my blood. He used to say I'd have headed west with Lewis and Clark if I'd been alive then. And now, still got that wanderlust." She looked out at the vast landscape surrounding them. "Perhaps. But I've learned that adventure isn't always what we imagine it to be. Sometimes it's just surviving one day to the next."
Adam nodded.
"Survival's nothing to scoff at. Plenty don't manage it out here." They fell into companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the creak of the wagon wheels and the occasional snort from the horses. Abigail found herself studying Adam's profile. When he wasn't looking, the strong line of his jaw, the way the sun had etched fine lines around his eyes, the capable hands that handled the reins with such ease. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steady reliability that stood in stark contrast to Edwin's volatile nature. Not that she was looking to make comparisons between men, she reminded herself firmly. Her focus now needed to be on rebuilding her life, not complicating it with new attachments. As they crested a final hill, the Bar Cross Ranch came into view. Below them, a sprawling operation with a large main house, several bunkhouses, barns, corrals, and outbuildings spread across the valley floor. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and smoke rose from multiple chimneys. "It's much larger than I expected," Abigail said, unable to hide her surprise. Adam nodded with evident pride. "One of the biggest spreads in the territory. Mr. Harrington started with just 50 head of cattle and 100 acres. Now it's over 10,000 acres and nearly 2,000 head." He guided the wagon down the slope toward the main compound. "We employ about 20 men year-round, more during roundup and branding." As they approached, Abigail could see activity everywhere, men moving between buildings, horses being exercised in a corral, smoke billowing from what appeared to be a blacksmith's forge. It was a far cry from the isolated existence she had known these past years. Adam directed the wagon toward the main house, a substantial 2-story structure built of timber and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around the front. Before they even came to a complete stop, the front door opened, and a woman stepped out onto the porch. "That's Mrs. Harrington," Adam said quietly. "Don't let her intimidate you. Her bark is worse than her bite." Margaret Harrington was a formidable-looking woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. She wore a practical dress of dark blue calico, adorned only by a white apron and a cameo brooch at her throat. Her posture was ramrod straight as she watched their approach, hands clasped in front of her. "Caldwell," she called as Adam brought the wagon to a halt. "I see you've brought our potential new cook." "Yes, madam," Adam replied, jumping down to help Abigail from her seat. "Mrs. Abigail Turner, as I mentioned." Abigail smoothed her skirt nervously before extending her hand to the older woman. "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Harrington. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the position." Margaret Harrington's handshake was firm, her assessing gaze direct. "Adam speaks highly of your cooking. Says you managed a respectable meal from next to nothing." "I've had practice making do with limited resources," Abigail replied honestly. Something that might have been approval flickered in Mrs. Harrington's eyes. "That's a valuable skill on a ranch. Come inside, and we'll discuss the particulars while Adam sees to your belongings." She turned to Adam. "Put Mrs. Turner's things in the east guest room for now. We'll sort out permanent arrangements later." "Yes, madam," Adam replied, already moving to unload Abigail's trunk. "And Caldwell," Mrs. Harrington added, "see that those chickens get settled in the henhouse, properly introduced to the existing flock." As Abigail followed Mrs. Harrington into the house, she glanced back to find Adam watching her, an encouraging smile on his face. Drawing a deep breath, she stepped across the threshold into her new life. The interior of the Harrington home was impressive by any standard, but especially to someone accustomed to a one-room cabin. Polished wooden floors gleamed beneath wool rugs, and the entryway opened into a spacious living room furnished with leather chairs and a settee arranged around a massive stone fireplace. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with more volumes than Abigail had seen since leaving Pennsylvania. "This way," Mrs. Harrington directed, leading her through the living room toward the back of the house. "I run a practical household, Mrs. Turner. My husband built this ranch from nothing, and while we've prospered, I've no patience for extravagance or idleness." "I understand completely," Abigail assured her. "I value hard work and practicality myself." They entered a large kitchen that smelled of fresh bread and coffee. A young girl of perhaps 16 was kneading dough at a flour-dusted table, while a pot bubbled on the massive cast-iron stove. This is Clara, our current kitchen help, Mrs. Harrington said. Clara, this is Mrs. Turner, who may be joining us through the winter. The girl looked up, pushing a strand of blonde hair from her flushed face. Hello, madam, she said with a shy smile. Hello, Clara, Abigail returned warmly. That bread smells wonderful. Mrs. Harrington gestured for Abigail to take a seat at the kitchen table while she poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot keeping warm on the stove. During normal operations, we feed about 25 people 3 meals a day, she explained, setting a steaming cup before Abigail. During Roundup, that number can double. Clara has been managing admirably, but she's young and still learning. What she lacks in experience, she makes up for in willingness. Clara blushed at the rare praise, concentrating intently on her dough. Adam tells me you're alone now, Mrs. Harrington continued, her direct approach catching Abigail off guard. Your husband left for the mines? Abigail took a sip of coffee to steady herself.
Yes.
It seems the farming life wasn't what he expected. Mrs. Harrington's expression remained neutral. The West breaks many men. And women too. It takes a particular constitution to thrive here. She studied Abigail over the rim of her cup. The position would be temporary to start through Roundup and perhaps the winter. Room and board plus $20 a month. The amount was generous, more than Abigail had expected. That's very fair, she said. You'd share quarters with Clara above the kitchen. It's small but comfortable. Sundays would be your half day, though during Roundup we all work straight through. Mrs. Harrington set down her cup. I should mention that I run a respectable house, Mrs. Turner. The ranch hands are not permitted in the main house except on special occasions, and fraternization between female staff and the men is strictly prohibited. Abigail felt heat rise in her cheeks. I assure you, Mrs. Harrington, that won't be a concern. I've only just that is, my husband's departure is very recent. The older woman's expression softened almost imperceptibly. Of course. I meant no offense. It's simply a rule I enforce for everyone's benefit. She stood, signaling the end of their conversation. If the terms are acceptable, you can start tomorrow. Clara will show you the routine. The terms are more than acceptable, Abigail said, rising as well. Thank you for the opportunity. Don't thank me yet, Mrs. Harrington replied with the ghost of a smile. Wait until you've cooked breakfast for 30 hungry cowboys. After being shown to her room, a small but clean chamber with a narrow bed, washstand, and chest of drawers, Abigail spent the remainder of the day familiarizing herself with the kitchen and pantry under Clara's enthusiastic guidance. The young girl was clearly relieved to have help and bubbled with conversation as she showed Abigail where everything was kept. Mrs. Harrington likes everything just so, Clara explained, indicating the precisely organized shelves of the pantry. Breakfast at 5 for the hands, 6 for the family. Dinner at noon sharp, and supper at 6. Mr. Harrington doesn't tolerate tardiness. What about Mr. Harrington? What sort of man is he? Abigail asked, taking mental notes on the kitchen's layout. Oh, he's fair but firm, Clara replied. Doesn't say much, but when he does, everyone listens. He's away right now, gone to Butte on business, but he'll be back before Roundup starts. She lowered her voice conspiratorially. The men respect him something fierce, especially Mr. Caldwell. Mr. Caldwell seems very capable, Abigail remarked, trying to sound casual as she examined the contents of a flour bin. Clara nodded enthusiastically. Best foreman the ranch has ever had, according to my pa. He works in the blacksmith shop, she added by way of explanation. Mr. Caldwell's fair with the men, but doesn't stand for laziness. And he can outride, outshoot, and outwork just about anyone. You sound quite impressed with him, Abigail observed, amused by the girl's obvious admiration. Clara blushed. Everyone is. Half the unmarried women in the county have set their caps for him, but he doesn't seem to notice. She sighed dramatically. My older sister Eliza made him a special pie last Christmas, and he thanked her just the same as if Mrs. Harrington had given it to him. Abigail couldn't help but smile at the girl's romanticism. Perhaps he's simply focused on his work. That's what Ma says, Clara agreed. Or maybe he's nursing a broken heart. That would be ever so tragic, wouldn't it? Before Abigail could respond to this fanciful notion, the kitchen door opened, and Adam himself entered, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. Clara immediately fell silent, her cheeks flaming red. "Mrs. Turner," he nodded respectfully. "Just wanted to let you know your chickens are settled in. They've already established their pecking order with our hens. Feisty little things." "Thank you, Mr. Caldwell," Abigail replied, conscious of Clara's wide-eyed observation. "I appreciate your assistance today." He seemed about to say more when Mrs. Harrington appeared in the doorway behind him. "Caldwell, Wilson's looking for you. Something about the north pasture fence." She glanced between him and Abigail with a raised eyebrow. "And supper preparations need to begin." "Yes, madam," Adam replied, settling his hat back on his head. "Good evening, ladies." After he'd gone, Mrs. Harrington gave Abigail a pointed look that clearly communicated her earlier rule about fraternization. Abigail busied herself with examining the stove, determined not to give the woman any reason to doubt her professionalism or intentions. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed listening to Clara's soft breathing from the other narrow cot, Abigail reflected on the swift changes in her circumstances. Just days ago, she had been facing winter alone, abandoned, and with few prospects. Now she had employment, shelter, and the beginnings of a new community. If there was an ache of loneliness still lodged in her heart, she chose to ignore it. She had survived Edwin's desertion. She would survive whatever came next. With that resolution firmly in mind, she finally drifted into a dreamless sleep. The days that followed settled into a rhythm of hard work that left little time for dwelling on the past. Abigail rose before dawn each morning to help Clara prepare breakfast for the ranch hands' mountains of flapjacks, eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy that disappeared as quickly as they could serve it. The men ate in a separate cookhouse adjacent to the bunkhouses, while the Harrington family took their meals in the dining room of the main house. By the end of her first week, Abigail had already begun to put her own stamp on the kitchen operations, reorganizing certain processes for efficiency and introducing new recipes that met with approval from both the Cowboys and Mrs. Harrington. Clara proved to be an eager student, soaking up Abigail's cooking knowledge like parched earth in a rainstorm. "Where did you learn to cook like this?" Clara asked one afternoon as they prepared a batch of apple pies for Sunday dinner. "These are the flakiest crusts I've ever seen." "My mother taught me the basics," Abigail replied, her hands working the dough with practiced ease. "But I learned many tricks from the women in our church back in Pennsylvania." Sunday socials were quite competitive when it came to baking. "I wish I'd known my mother," Clara said quietly, carefully slicing apples as Abigail had shown her. "She died when I was just a baby. Pa says I look like her, though." Abigail felt a surge of affection for the girl. "I'm sure she would be very proud of the young woman you've become." Clara beamed at the compliment, then lowered her voice. "Have you heard the news? Mr. Harrington's coming home tomorrow. There's to be a special dinner to welcome him." "Mrs. Harrington mentioned it this morning." Abigail nodded. "We're to prepare his favorite meal, roast beef with Yorkshire pudding. Everyone gets so busy when he returns," Clara continued, her hands moving rhythmically with a knife. "Especially now with Roundup about to start. The men have been gathering cattle from the far pastures all week. Did you know some of our herds graze nearly 20 miles from here?" "I didn't realize the operation was quite so extensive," Abigail admitted. "Oh, yes. Pa says Bar Cross is the most important ranch in the whole territory. Mr. Harrington's even been to Washington to meet with senators about cattle prices and railroad access." Clara's eyes widened with the importance of this information. Pa says he might run for territorial representative next year. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Harrington, who came to inspect their progress on the next day's welcome feast. She nodded approvingly at the pies taking shape. Mr. Harrington is particularly fond of apple pie, she noted. These look promising. Mrs. Turner has a special technique for the crust, Clara volunteered enthusiastically. She uses ice water and keeps everything cold, even her hands. Mrs. Harrington's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. Indeed? Well, I look forward to tasting the results. She turned to Abigail. You've made a good impression this week, Mrs. Turner. The men have commented favorably on the improvements to the meals. Coming from the reserved woman, this was high praise. Thank you, Mrs. Harrington. I'm grateful for the opportunity. Yes, well, the older woman smoothed her apron. I've decided to extend your position through the winter if you're amenable. We can discuss more permanent arrangements in the spring. Relief washed through Abigail. The security of employment through the harsh winter months was more than she had dared hope for so soon. That would be most welcome. Thank you. After Mrs. Harrington departed, Clara could barely contain her excitement. Oh, this is wonderful news. Now you can stay for Christmas and the winter dance. Winter dance? Abigail questioned, returning her attention to the pie dough. It's the biggest social event of the year, Clara explained. Every January, the Harringtons host a dance for all the neighboring ranches. There's music and food and dancing until dawn. Everyone attends, even some folks from town make the journey, if the weather permits. The idea of a social gathering after so much isolation was both appealing and slightly daunting. Abigail couldn't remember the last time she had attended an event purely for pleasure. Certainly not since moving to the Montana Territory. It sounds lovely, she said, though privately she wondered what she would wear to such an occasion. Her few dresses were practical garments suited for daily work, not social dancing. It is. Last year, Eliza danced 3 times with Jeffrey Williams from the Diamond Bar Ranch. Clara sighed dreamily. They're to be married next spring. All from a dance? Abigail teased gently. Clara laughed. Well, he'd been sweet on her for ages. The dance just gave him the courage to speak up. She began arranging apple slices in the pie shell. Maybe the cereal dance, too. Abigail didn't respond, focusing instead on crimping the edges of her pie crust with careful precision. The idea of dancing, of being held in a man's arms, even in the proper form of a country reel or waltz, seemed foreign to her now. Edwin had never been one for dancing, claiming it was foolishness better left to town folk with time to waste. Yet unbidden, an image rose in her mind of Adam Caldwell in his Sunday best, hand extended in invitation. She pushed the thought away firmly. Such fancies were inappropriate for a woman whose husband had abandoned her mere weeks ago, regardless of the state of that marriage in its final days. The next day brought both excitement and tension to the ranch as preparations were made for Charles Harrington's return. Abigail and Clara were up before dawn, putting the finishing touches on the welcome feast that would be served that evening. By mid-morning, the delicious aroma of roasting beef permeated the kitchen, mingling with the scent of fresh bread and pies cooling on the windowsill. Shortly after noon, a shout went up from one of the hands on watch, announcing the approach of riders. Abigail watched through the kitchen window as Mrs. Harrington emerged onto the front porch, straightening her best dress and touching a hand to her impeccably arranged hair. Despite her usual reserve, there was a visible softening in her posture as she awaited her husband's arrival. The ranch owner arrived at the head of a small party of men, his bearing commanding even from a distance. Charles Harrington was a tall, broad-shouldered man with a full beard shot through with gray. He dismounted with the ease of someone half his apparent age and immediately strode to his wife, taking both her hands in his own. Though Abigail couldn't hear their exchange, the affection between them was evident even in their reserved greeting. "That's Mr. Harrington," Clara whispered unnecessarily, peering over Abigail's shoulder. And that's Mr. Wilson beside him. He's the cattle buyer who handles our sales in Butte. Abigail's attention was drawn instead to Adam, who had ridden out earlier to meet the returning party, and now sat astride his horse conversing with another man. Even at a distance, there was something compelling about his presence, a natural authority that drew the eye. As if sensing her gaze, Adam turned toward the kitchen window. Abigail stepped back quickly, embarrassed to be caught watching. "We should finish the puddings," she said to Clara, moving briskly back to the stove. The welcome dinner that evening was served in the formal dining room, with Abigail and Clara bringing courses to the table where the Harringtons entertained their guests. Adam, as foreman, was included in this inner circle, along with Mr. Wilson and two other men Abigail gathered were business associates from Butte. It was the first time she had seen Adam in anything other than his work clothes. Dressed in a clean white shirt, dark vest, and pressed trousers, with his hair neatly combed, he cut an impressive figure. She noticed he spoke little during the meal, observing more than participating in the business discussions that dominated the conversation. When Abigail brought in the apple pie for dessert, she was surprised when Mr. Harrington addressed her directly. "Mrs. Turner, I understand we have you to thank for this outstanding meal," he said, his voice carrying the cultured tones of an Eastern education despite years in the West. "Thank you, sir, but Clara deserves equal credit," Abigail replied, setting the pie before Mrs. Harrington for serving. "Modesty is admirable, but Margaret tells me you've revolutionized our kitchen in just a week." He smiled, the expression warming his otherwise serious face. "The men are quite impressed, and it takes more than a little to impress that bunch of hard cases." Abigail felt herself flush at the praise. "I'm simply doing my job, Mr. Harrington." "And doing it exceptionally well," he nodded. "I understand you were homesteading before joining us?" She was aware of Adam watching her closely, his expression unreadable. "Yes, sir. For 4 years." "Difficult business, homesteading," Harrington remarked. "Especially in this territory. The land can be unforgiving." "Yes, sir. It requires adaptability." Something in her tone must have communicated more than her words, for Harrington's gaze sharpened with interest. "Indeed it does, Mrs. Turner. Indeed it does." As she turned to leave, Abigail's eyes briefly met Adam's across the table. There was a warmth in his gaze that sent an unexpected flutter through her chest. She quickly looked away, reminding herself of Mrs. Harrington's rules and her own vulnerable position. The evening concluded with Mr. Harrington announcing that roundup would begin in earnest the following day, with cattle being gathered from the far pastures and driven to the home range for counting, branding, and selection for market. The next several weeks would be the busiest of the year for the ranch, with all hands working from dawn until well after dusk. For Abigail and Clara, this meant rising at 3 a.m. to prepare meals not only for the men eating at the ranch, but also for those who would be out with the herds all day. Pack horses would carry food to the distant camps, and hot meals needed to be ready whenever the exhausted cowboys returned, regardless of the hour. It was grueling work, but Abigail found herself thriving under the pressure. The physical demands of cooking for so many left little energy for dwelling on her troubles, and the genuine appreciation from the ranch hands for her efforts was a balm to her wounded spirit. She saw Adam only in passing during those first days of roundup, a brief nod as he collected coffee before dawn, a tired smile as he returned with the last group of riders after dark. He was always flanked by other men, making conversation impossible even had she wished to speak with him. And she wasn't sure she did. The rules against fraternization were clear, and her position at the ranch too precious to risk. Besides, her legal status remained ambiguous, abandoned but not divorced, neither truly married nor truly single. It was a limbo she wasn't prepared to navigate, especially not with a man who stirred such confusing feelings within her. A week into roundup, Abigail was kneading bread dough before dawn when the kitchen door opened, admitting a blast of cold air and Adam Caldwell. She looked up in surprise. It was earlier than usual for the men to be collecting breakfast. Mr. Caldwell, she acknowledged, continuing her work. Coffee's not quite ready yet. Didn't come for coffee, he said, shutting the door against the pre-dawn chill. Came to deliver news. He hesitated, an unusual uncertainty in his manner. Perhaps you should sit down, Mrs. Turner. Abigail's hands stilled in the dough, a cold dread seeping into her bones. I prefer to stand, thank you. What news? Adam removed his hat, turning it in his hands. Word came in last night from Idaho. There was an accident at the Silver Summit mine 3 days ago. Cave in. He met her eyes directly. Your husband was among those killed. The information hit Abigail like a physical blow, yet she felt strangely detached, as if hearing about a stranger. Are they certain it was Edwin?
Adam noddet grimly.
The mine had his name on their employment records. He'd been working there just over 2 weeks.
He paused. I'm sorry, Abigail.
It was the first time he had used her given name, and somehow that detail penetrated the numbness enveloping her more than the news of Edwin's death. I see, she said, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. She looked down at her flour-covered hands. Thank you for telling me. Adam took a step closer, concern etched on his features. Is there anything you need? Anyone you'd like us to notify? Abigail shook her head. There's no one. My parents are gone, and Edwin's family disowned him years ago when he decided to come west. She resumed, kneading the dough with mechanical movements. We'll need extra biscuits this morning. The men working the North Range will be cold. Abigail, Adam said gently, if you don't have to keep working right now. Mrs. Harrington would understand what I understand, Mrs. Harrington's voice came from the doorway, making them both turn, is that grief takes different forms for different people. She entered fully into the kitchen, already dressed for the day despite the early hour. Sometimes work is the best medicine. Abigail felt a rush of gratitude toward the older woman for her perception.
Yes.
That's exactly it. Her voice caught unexpectedly. I need to be useful. Mrs. Harrington nodded. Very understandable. She turned to Adam. Caldwell, I believe Mr. Harrington was looking for you. Something about the herd counts from yesterday. It was a dismissal, and they all knew it. Adam hesitated, looking as if he wanted to say more to Abigail, but finally nodded. Yes, madam. He settled his hat back on his head, and with a last concerned glance at Abigail, departed. When he was gone, Mrs. Harrington approached the table where Abigail continued to work the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. I couldn't help overhearing, she said. I'm sorry about your husband. Thank you, Abigail replied, fighting to maintain her composure.
It's
complicated. It usually is. The older woman studied her for a moment. My first husband died of cholera in '62. We'd been married less than a year. Abigail looked up in surprise. Mrs. Harrington rarely shared personal information. I threw myself into teaching school, she continued. Worked from dawn till dusk, barely allowing myself time to breathe, let alone feel. She folded her arms across her chest. It was 3 months before I finally broke down in the middle of a grammar lesson of all things. Cried for 2 days straight. Did it help? The crying? In its way. Mrs. Harrington's usually stern expression softened. Grief will have its due, Mrs. Turner. One way or another. Better on your terms than when it ambushes you. Abigail nodded, unexpected tears pricking at her eyes. I don't even know what I'm feeling, she admitted. Shock, certainly. But also relief. The confession felt both liberating and shameful. Does that make me a terrible person? It makes you human, Mrs. Harrington replied matter-of-factly. And honest, which is rare enough. She moved toward the stove to check the coffee pot. Take the day if you need it. Clara and I can manage. No, Abigail said firmly, dividing the dough into portions for biscuits. I'd rather work, but thank you for understanding. Mrs. Harrington nodded once, approval in her eyes.
Very well.
I'll send Clara down to help with breakfast. And Mrs. Turner? When you're ready to talk about anything, my door is open. The following days passed in a blur of activity as Roundup reached its peak intensity. Abigail threw herself into her work with a single-minded focus that left no room for dwelling on Edwin's death or what it might mean for her future. If she occasionally found herself staring into space, wooden spoon forgotten in her hand, Clara tactfully redirected her attention without comment. Word of her widowhood spread quickly through the ranch, resulting in an awkward deference from the Cowboys when they came for meals. Men who had previously joked and teased now spoke in hushed tones around her, as if she might shatter at any moment. It was a relief when young Billy, the red-headed hand who had helped with her firewood, finally broke the tension by loudly proclaiming her apple dumplings good enough to make a dead man sit up and beg for seconds. The startled silence that followed his comment was broken first by Abigail's unexpected laugh, and then by the relieved chuckles of the other men. After that, things gradually returned to a more natural rhythm, for which she was grateful. Adam kept his distance during this time, though Abigail often felt his watchful gaze when their paths crossed. Whether this was out of respect for her presumed grief or adherence to Mrs. Harrington's rules against fraternization, she couldn't be sure. She told herself it was for the best, even as she found herself looking for him whenever the men gathered for meals. 2 weeks after receiving news of Edwin's death, a letter arrived for Abigail from the mining company. It contained formal notification of the accident, along with Edwin's final pay $26.40 and his few personal effects, his wedding ring, pocket watch, and a small Bible she had given him on their first anniversary. That night, alone in her room while Clara visited her family in the blacksmith's cottage, Abigail finally allowed herself to weep. Not for the man Edwin had become in those final bitter months, but for the hopeful young couple they had once been, and for all the dreams that had withered in the harsh reality of frontier life. When the tears finally subsided, she felt oddly peaceful, as if a weight had been lifted. Edwin was gone, and with him the last ties to a life that had brought more hardship than joy. Whatever came next would be of her own making. The next morning, she rose before dawn as usual, but took a moment to wrap herself in a shawl and step outside before beginning breakfast preparations. The sky was just beginning to lighten in the east, stars still visible in the western horizon. The air held the crisp promise of winter, though autumn still painted the distant hills in gold and russet. Movement near the barn caught her attention, a solitary figure leading a horse into the yard. Even in the dim light, she recognized Adam's distinctive gait. He was setting out earlier than the other men, perhaps to check on a distant part of the herd before the day's main work began. Without consciously deciding to do so, Abigail found herself walking toward him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. He looked up at her approach, surprise evident in his expression. "Mrs. Turner," he greeted her, his breath visible in the cold air. "You're up early, even by your standards." "As are you, Mr. Caldwell," she replied, pulling her shawl tighter against the chill. "I wanted to thank you." His brow furrowed slightly. "For what?" "For bringing me here. For the firewood." "For..." She hesitated, searching for the right words. "For your kindness, when you didn't have to be kind." Adam's expression softened. "No thanks necessary. Anyone would have done the same." "No," she said firmly. "Not anyone. Not Edwin." The words slipped out before she could stop them. He studied her face in the growing light. "How are you?" Truly, it was a simple question, yet no one else had asked it quite so directly since the news of Edwin's death. Mrs. Harrington had been supportive but reserved, and Clara, for all her sweet nature, was too young to understand the complexities of Abigail's situation. She began, then paused, considering. "I'm finding my way, I think." It's strange. I mourned the loss of my marriage long before Edwin physically left. His death feels almost redundant. She winced at how callous the word sounded. That's terrible, isn't it? It's honest, Adam replied, echoing Mrs. Harrington's earlier assessment. And understandable. From what little I saw, he didn't treat you as a husband should. No, he didn't, she agreed quietly. But I wasn't blameless either. I pushed for us to come west when he was content in Pennsylvania. I insisted we could make the homestead work when the signs were clear it was failing. She looked up at the lightening sky. We both made mistakes. Adam was silent for a moment, absently stroking his horse's neck. My father used to say that marriage is like breaking a wild horse, he finally said. It takes two people pulling in the same direction to make it work. One person alone, no matter how determined, can't do it. The analogy struck Abigail as aptly perceptive. Your father sounds like a wise man. He was, Adam nodded, a hint of old grief in his voice. Lost him and my mother both to influenza when I was 20. Taught me not to waste time on regrets for things beyond my control. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the first rays of sun crested the eastern hills, painting the world in soft gold. I should let you get to your duties, Abigail finally said, reluctant to end their conversation but aware of the impropriety of being alone with him at such an hour. Adam nodded, though he seemed similarly reluctant. And I should get riding if I want to check the north pasture before meeting the other men. He hesitated, then added, Mr. Harrington mentioned you might want to visit your homestead soon, to collect anything you left behind. If you'd like company for the journey, I'd be happy to escort you when roundup is finished. The offer touched her deeply. That's very kind, but I wouldn't want to impose on your time. It's no imposition, he assured her. It's not safe for a woman to travel alone, and I'd feel better knowing you had proper protection. His concern seemed to extend beyond mere politeness, and Abigail found herself nodding. Then yes, I would appreciate the escort. Thank you. A smile broke across Adam's face, transforming his usually serious expression into something that made Abigail's heart skip a beat.
Good.
We can go next week if the weather holds. With a tip of his hat, he mounted his horse and rode out, leaving Abigail standing in the early morning light with an unfamiliar warmth spreading through her chest despite the cold air. She watched him until he disappeared over the ridge, then turned back toward the kitchen, her steps lighter than they had been in months. Only as she reached the door did she realize she was smiling. The remainder of Roundup passed in a flurry of activity, with Abigail and Clara working long hours to feed the hungry men who returned exhausted each evening. By the time the last cattle had been counted, branded, and either selected for market or released back to winter pasture, everyone on the ranch was ready for a well-earned rest. Mr. Harrington hosted a celebratory dinner for all hands, with extra rations of whiskey and a special feast prepared by Abigail. The atmosphere was jovial, with men swapping stories of their roundup adventures and boasting good-naturedly about their riding skills or close calls with ornery steers. Abigail, serving alongside Clara, found herself enjoying the camaraderie, occasionally joining in the laughter when a particularly outrageous tale was shared. She noticed Adam sitting somewhat apart from the rowdier cowboys, conversing quietly with Mr. Harrington and the more senior hands. Once or twice, she caught him looking in her direction, his expression thoughtful. After the meal, when most of the men had moved outside to enjoy their whiskey and tobacco around campfires, Adam approached her as she cleared plates from the long tables. That was quite a feast, he said, helping her stack dishes despite her protests that it wasn't necessary. The men were saying it was the best end of roundup meal they've ever had at Bar Cross. High praise indeed, she smiled, pleased by the compliment. Though I suspect the whiskey Mr. Harrington provided may have enhanced their appreciation of the food. Adam chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. Perhaps, but talent speaks for itself. He carried a stack of plates to the washing area where Clara was already elbow-deep in suds. "I wanted to let you know I've spoken with Mr. Harrington about escorting you to your homestead. We can leave day after tomorrow, if that suits. Should be able to make it there and back in a day." "That would be perfect," Abigail replied. "I don't need much time there. Just enough to collect a few personal items I left behind."
"We'll take the wagon then.
"Give you space to bring back whatever you need." He hesitated, then added more quietly, "I also thought you might want some time there to say goodbye properly." His perceptiveness caught her off guard. She had indeed been thinking of the trip as a form of closure, though she hadn't expressed this to anyone. "Yes," she admitted. "I would like that." Adam nodded, understanding in his eyes. "We'll leave at first light, then. I'll have the wagon ready." 2 days later, as promised, Abigail found Adam waiting in the pre-dawn darkness with the wagon hitched and ready. Mrs. Harrington had packed them a basket of food for the journey, and Clara had insisted on sending along extra blankets in case of unexpected weather, though the day promised to be clear and mild for late autumn. As they set out, the eastern sky gradually lightening from black to deep blue to pale gold, Abigail felt a strange mixture of anticipation and trepidation. She had not set foot on the homestead since leaving with Adam weeks ago, and she wasn't entirely sure what emotions awaited her there. The journey passed pleasantly, with conversation flowing easily between them. Adam shared stories of his early days on the ranch, working his way up from a green hand barely able to stay in the saddle to his current position as foreman. In turn, Abigail spoke of her childhood in Pennsylvania, her parents' teaching careers, and her early dreams of adventure. "So, what's next for you?" Adam asked as they crested a hill, the landscape opening before them. "Now that you're established at the ranch, I mean." Abigail considered the question. "I haven't thought much beyond surviving the winter," she admitted, "though Mrs. Harrington has hinted she'd like me to stay on permanently." "And would you want that? To stay at Bar Cross?" There was something in his tone that made her glance at him, but his expression revealed nothing as he kept his eyes on the road ahead. "I think I would," she said slowly. "I enjoy the work, and I've grown fond of Clara. Mrs. Harrington is strict but fair, and the position offers security I haven't had in some time." She smiled slightly. "And I must admit, cooking for appreciative eaters is far more rewarding than struggling to coax crops from unyielding soil." Adam nodded, seemingly satisfied with her answer. "The ranch is a good place. A community. Something many folks out here never find." "Is that why you've stayed so long?" she asked. "The sense of community?" He thought for a moment before responding.
"Partly.
After losing my parents, the ranch became a kind of family. Mr. Harrington took a chance on me when I was just a reckless young man with more confidence than skill. I owe him a great deal. He guided the team around a bend in the road. But it's more than loyalty keeping me there. I believe in what we're building, not just a profitable cattle operation, but a place where good people can put down roots and thrive." There was a passion in his voice that Abigail found compelling. This wasn't merely a job to Adam, it was a calling, a purpose. "That's a worthy ambition," she said softly. He glanced at her then, a smile crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Reckon it is." They fell into companionable silence as the miles passed beneath the wagon wheels. Finally, in the early afternoon, they crested the last rise, and Abigail's homestead came into view below the small cabin, the untended fields, the empty corral where their horse had once grazed. Adam slowed the wagon, giving her time to absorb the sight. "Would you like me to wait here while you go down alone?" The consideration in his offer touched her, but Abigail shook her head.
"No.
"I'd prefer your company, if you don't mind." As they approached the cabin, Abigail was struck by how small and forlorn it appeared after her time at the ranch. The door hung slightly ajar, evidence that someone, perhaps a traveler seeking shelter, had entered in her absence. She felt a momentary alarm, quickly followed by the realization that there was little of value to steal. Adam helped her down from the wagon, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "I'll check inside first," he said, his right hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. "Make sure we don't have any unwelcome visitors." He returned moments later with the all clear, and Abigail stepped across the threshold of what had been her home for 4 years. The interior was much as she had left it, though a layer of dust covered every surface, and there were signs that small animals had been investigating the corners. Moving with purpose, she collected the few remaining items she had left behind: a small jewelry box containing her mother's cameo, several books, a quilt pieced by her grandmother, and a cedar chest that held keepsakes and letters from her childhood. Adam carried the heavier items to the wagon without comment, giving her space to move through the cabin at her own pace. When she had gathered everything she wished to take, Abigail stood in the center of the room, taking a final look around. Memories rose unbidden Edwin's face on their first night here, full of hope and determination. The brutal first winter, when they had huddled together beneath every blanket they owned. The rare good days when they had worked side by side, temporarily united in purpose. "Are you all right?" Adam asked from the doorway, his voice gentle. She nodded, drawing a deep breath.
"Yes."
"I'm ready." They stepped outside together, and Abigail pulled the door closed firmly behind her, a symbolic gesture of finality. As they walked toward the wagon, a movement near the barn caught her attention. A deer, elegant and alert, stood watching them with liquid brown eyes before bounding away into the tall grass. "Life goes on," Adam remarked, following her gaze. "Nature reclaims what humans abandon." "Yes," Abigail agreed. "And perhaps that's as it should be." They ate their lunch on a small hill overlooking the homestead, sharing Mrs. Harrington's packed meal and a bottle of cool cider. The autumn sun was warm on their faces, belying the chill that would soon envelope the land as winter approached. "Thank you for coming with me today," Abigail said as they finished their meal. "It would have been much harder alone." "My pleasure," Adam replied, leaning back on his elbows and surveying the landscape. "It's beautiful country, despite its hardships." "It is," she agreed. "I used to sit on this very hill when the cabin felt too confining. Watch the sunrise, or the stars emerge at night." She smiled at the memory. "Edwin thought I was foolish, wasting time daydreaming when there was always work to be done." "Some might say taking time to appreciate beauty isn't foolish at all," Adam observed. "Might be what keeps us human in a hard land." Abigail looked at him with newfound appreciation. "That's exactly it. I needed those moments to remember why we had come here in the first place, for something more than mere survival." Adam met her gaze, his eyes reflecting the same understanding that had drawn her to him from their first meeting. "And have you found it? Something more than survival?" The question hung between them, weighted with meaning that extended beyond the literal interpretation. Abigail felt her heart quicken, aware they were approaching territory that challenged the careful boundaries she had maintained since Edwin's departure. "I believe I'm beginning to," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Adam held her gaze for a long moment, something unspoken passing between them before he nodded and rose to his feet. "We should head back if we want to reach the ranch before dark." The return journey was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts as the wagon rolled steadily eastward. The sun was setting as they approached Bar Cross, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and pink that gradually deepened to purple. Adam brought the wagon to a halt just outside the ranch compound, turning to Abigail before the bustle of their arrival could interrupt the moment of privacy. "I wanted to say," he began, then paused, seeming to search for the right words. "I know it's soon. After everything. But when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'd like to call on you properly." His eyes held hers steadily. "With honorable intentions." The directness of his statement took Abigail's breath away. It was not a declaration of love, they knew each other too little for that, but a declaration of possibility, an opening of a door that she had thought permanently closed. "Adam," she said, his name feeling right on her lips. "I would like that. But I need time." He nodded, relief and understanding mingling in his expression. "Time you shall have. As much as you need." He smiled then, the gesture warming his features. "I'm a patient man, Abigail Turner." She returned his smile, feeling a lightness in her chest that had been absent for longer than she could remember. "Then we have an understanding, Mr. Caldwell." "We do indeed, Mrs. Turner." With that, he clicked to the horses and guided the wagon into the ranch yard, where lights were beginning to glow in the windows against the gathering darkness. The weeks that followed took on a new rhythm as the ranch settled into its winter routine. With fewer men to feed, Abigail and Clara had more time for other tasks: mending, preserving late autumn vegetables, and preparing for the Christmas festivities that Mrs. Harrington insisted were an essential tradition despite their remote location. Adam, true to his word, gave Abigail the space she needed, though his quiet attention was evident in small gestures, ensuring she had the first cup of coffee in the morning, carrying heavy supplies from the storeroom without being asked, occasionally leaving a wildflower or interesting stone on the kitchen windowsill where she would find it during her morning preparations. They spoke often, gradually learning each other's histories and temperaments through conversations stolen in the quiet moments before the rest of the ranch stirred or in the evening after supper had been cleared away. Abigail found herself increasingly drawn to his steady nature, his quiet humor, and the depth of thought that lay beneath his sometimes reserved exterior. For his part, Adam seemed equally intrigued by her, listening attentively to her stories and opinions with a respect Edwin had rarely shown. More than once, she caught him watching her with a warmth in his eyes that sent color rushing to her cheeks. As November gave way to December, snow blanketed the landscape, transforming the ranch into a wonderland of white. The Christmas preparations intensified, with Mrs. Harrington organizing the men to cut evergreen boughs for decorating the main house, and Clara enlisted to help Abigail bake the traditional cookies and fruitcakes that would be part of the celebration. One evening, as Abigail was finishing the dinner dishes alone, Clara having been excused to help her father with a special project, Adam appeared in the kitchen doorway, a dusting of snow on his shoulders and a mysterious bundle under his arm. "Evening, Abigail," he greeted her, the use of her given name now comfortable between them when no one else was present. "Do you have a moment?" "Of course," she replied, drying her hands on her apron. "Is everything all right?" "Everything's fine," he assured her, stepping fully into the kitchen's warmth. "I just wanted to give you something. An early Christmas gift, of sorts." He set the bundle on the table and carefully unwrapped it to reveal a beautiful leather-bound book, a blank journal with creamy pages, and a delicate blue ribbon marker. "I noticed you writing on scraps of paper sometimes," he explained as she ran her fingers over the soft leather cover. "Thought you might like something proper to write in." Abigail was momentarily speechless, touched by both the thoughtfulness of the gift and the fact that he had observed her habit of jotting down thoughts and memories when time allowed. "Adam, it's beautiful," she finally said, looking up to find him watching her reaction with evident pleasure. "But how did you get this?" "I haven't seen anything like it in the general store." "Had it ordered from Denver," he admitted. "Mr. Harrington sends a supply list each month." Asked if he'd add it to the last order. The effort involved planning weeks in advance, arranging for the purchase and delivery made the gift all the more precious. It spoke of forethought, of genuine attention to her interests and needs. "Thank you," she said softly. "It's perfect." Adam smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "Thought you might use it to write about your new beginning. Or maybe stories for someday telling your—" He stopped abruptly, color rising in his cheeks. "That is, for preserving memories." Abigail understood the words he had almost spoken for someday telling your children and found the idea didn't frighten her as it might have even a month ago. Instead, it planted a seed of possibility in her heart. I will treasure it, she promised, holding the journal close. Adam cleared his throat, seemingly embarrassed by his near slip. Well, I should let you finish up here. Early start tomorrow, we're moving the herd to the south pasture, where there's better shelter from the north wind. He turned to go, but Abigail stopped him with a light touch on his arm. Adam, wait. When he faced her again, she continued, I've been thinking about what you said. About calling on me properly, when I was ready. His expression grew serious, attentive. And have you come to a decision? Abigail took a deep breath. I have. I would like that very much. To be courted, I mean. She met his gaze steadily. I believe I'm ready to move forward. The smile that broke across Adam's face was like sunrise after a long night. Miss Abigail Turner, he said formally, though his eyes danced with hardly suppressed joy, would you do me the honor of accompanying me to the Christmas Eve service in town? Weather permitting, of course. Mr. Adam Caldwell, she replied with equal formality, though her own smile threatened to overtake her composure. I would be delighted to accept your invitation. He reached for her hand, his touch gentle as he raised it to his lips in a gesture that was both old-fashioned and deeply meaningful. Until Christmas Eve, then. After he departed, Abigail stood in the warm kitchen, the journal clutched to her chest, feeling as though her life had turned a corner into territory both frightening and exhilarating. For the first time in years, she was looking forward rather than simply enduring, anticipating rather than dreading what lay ahead. News of their courtship spread quickly through the ranch, met with varying reactions. Clara was ecstatically romantic about the development, peppering Abigail with questions and sighing happily over what she deemed a perfect match. The Cowboys were more reserved in their comments, but showed their approval through good-natured teasing directed at Adam during mealtimes. Mrs. Harrington's reaction was the one Abigail had most feared, given the woman's strict rules about fraternization. To her surprise, the ranch mistress merely nodded when Adam formally requested permission to court Abigail. About time you settled down, Caldwell, was her only comment, though Abigail later caught the older woman watching them with what might have been approval in her usually stern gaze. Mr. Harrington was more openly enthusiastic, clapping Adam on the shoulder and declaring that a good woman makes a man twice the worker he'd be alone. He took Abigail aside one evening to assure her that her position at the ranch was secure regardless of the outcome of the courtship, a gesture she deeply appreciated for the freedom it gave her to follow her heart without practical concerns clouding her judgment. Christmas Eve arrived with perfect winter weather, clear skies, a light blanket of fresh snow, and temperatures mild enough to make the journey to town comfortable. Adam had arranged for a sleigh rather than a wagon, complete with thick buffalo robes to ward off the chill and heated bricks wrapped in flannel for their feet. Abigail wore her best dress, a deep green wool that she had carefully altered to reflect current fashions as best she could determine from the occasional magazine that made its way to the ranch. Clara had insisted on helping with her hair, arranging it in a becoming style with a ribbon that matched the dress. When Adam arrived to collect her, his expression of admiration made all the effort worthwhile. He was handsomely dressed himself, in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and a crisp white shirt that contrasted with his tan skin. You are a vision, Abigail, he said simply, his eyes conveying what words could not. Thank you, she replied, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't been during their many conversations. You look very handsome yourself. The sleigh ride to town was magical, with the stars emerging one by one in the darkening sky and the snow glittering in the moonlight. Adam kept up a steady stream of conversation, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of his first winter at Barcross when he had gotten hopelessly lost in a blizzard and had been saved only by the intelligence of his horse finding its way back to the barn. The small church in town was filled to capacity when they arrived, with families from all the surrounding ranches and homesteads gathered for the special service. Abigail felt the curious gazes of many as Adam escorted her to a pew, his hand protectively at the small of her back. Word had clearly spread about the Barcross foreman's new courtship. The service was simple but moving, with familiar carols sung by the congregation and a sermon focused on hope and new beginnings that seemed particularly relevant to Abigail's circumstances. Throughout, she was acutely aware of Adam beside her, the warmth of his presence, the rich bass of his voice during the hymns, the way his hand occasionally brushed against hers on the shared hymnal. After the service, there was a small reception in the church hall, with punch and cookies served by the ladies' auxiliary. Adam introduced Abigail to numerous people, neighboring ranchers, the town doctor and his wife, the schoolteacher, the blacksmith who supplied the ranch with horseshoes and equipment repairs. Everyone was welcoming, though Abigail noticed several young women regarding her with poorly disguised envy. "You seem to have broken a few hearts in town," she teased Adam quietly as they accepted cups of punch from a beaming elderly woman who had been introduced as the mayor's wife. Adam looked genuinely confused. "What do you mean?" "Those young ladies by the cookie table have been glaring daggers at me since we arrived," she explained, amused by his obliviousness. "I believe you were considered quite a catch, Mr. Caldwell." He followed her gaze, then shook his head with a bemused smile. "Never gave them any reason to think so. I've been too busy with the ranch to socialize much." "Which no doubt only increased your appeal," Abigail laughed. "The handsome, mysterious foreman who never dances at the socials." Adam's expression grew serious despite the light-hearted conversation. "Never had reason to dance before," he said quietly, his eyes holding hers. "Never met anyone who made me want to." The simple statement, spoken with such evident sincerity, made Abigail's heart flutter in a way she hadn't experienced since her earliest days with Edwin. But this was different, somehow deeper, more grounded in reality rather than youthful fantasy. "And now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now," he replied, his gaze never leaving hers, "I find myself counting the days until the winter dance, when I can properly ask you to stand up with me." The journey back to the ranch was quiet, both of them wrapped in their own thoughts as the sleigh glided over the snow-covered road. The night had grown colder, and Adam tucked the buffalo robe more securely around Abigail, his arm remaining across the back of the seat, not quite holding her but offering warmth and protection nonetheless. As the lights of Barcross came into view, Adam slowed the horses to prolong their time alone. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. "Another Christmas gift, though this one's meant to be opened tomorrow." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with a simple red ribbon. It was lightweight, and something inside shifted slightly when she took it. "May I open it now?" she asked, curiosity overriding convention.
Adam similet indulgently.
"If you wish." Carefully untying the ribbon, Abigail unwrapped the paper to reveal a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of wildflowers around the edges. When she opened the hinged lid, a sweet melody began to play, a music box, its delicate tune clear in the still night air. "It's beautiful," she breathed, watching the tiny mechanism turn within. "I've never owned anything like it." "It was my mother's," Adam said softly. "One of the few things I kept after she passed. The tune is Greensleeves. It was always her favorite." The significance of him giving her such a personal family heirloom was not lost on Abigail. "Adam, I can't accept this. It's too precious. That's why I want you to have it," he interrupted gently. "Because it's precious to me. Because you're precious to me, Abigail." The words hung in the cold air between them, a declaration that stopped just short of love, but implied its direction clearly enough. Abigail felt tears prick at her eyes, moved beyond words by the gesture and all it represented. "Thank you," she managed finally, closing the music box carefully and holding it close. "I will cherish it always." Adam's gaze lingered on her face, and for a moment, she thought he might kiss her. Instead, he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch as light as a snowflake. "Merry Christmas, Abigail," he said softly. "Merry Christmas, Adam," she replied, her heart too full for more elaborate speech. He clicked to the horses then, guiding the sleigh the remaining distance to the ranch, where golden light spilled from the windows of the main house and smoke curled invitingly from the chimney, promising warmth and welcome after their journey. As Adam helped her down from the sleigh, Abigail knew with sudden clarity that she was no longer simply surviving. She was beginning to thrive again, like a plant turning toward the sun after a long winter. And the man standing before her, with snowflakes catching in his dark hair and affection warming his blue eyes, was a significant part of that transformation. The weeks following Christmas brought heavy snows and bitter cold, confining most of the ranch's activities to essential operations. The men spent their days ensuring the cattle had access to feed and unfrozen water, while Abigail and Clara kept the kitchen fires burning and meals ready for the cold, hungry cowboys who trudged in with snow-covered boots and frosted beards. Despite the harsh weather, or perhaps because of the enforced closeness it created, Abigail and Adam's courtship flourished. They found moments to be together each day, sharing coffee before dawn, taking brief walks when the weather permitted, sitting side by side in the main house parlor during the Sunday afternoons when Mrs. Harrington invited the senior staff to join the family for music and conversation. January brought the much-anticipated winter dance, held in the Bar Cross barn, which had been transformed for the occasion with evergreen boughs, ribbons, and countless lanterns casting a warm glow over the proceedings. Neighbors from miles around braved the winter trails to attend, bringing food, drink, and musicians to create a festive atmosphere that defied the season's bleakness. For Abigail, the night was magical. Adam had arranged for a seamstress in town to make her a new dress for the occasion, a rich blue silk that complemented her honey-brown hair and brought out the amber flecks in her brown eyes. When he led her onto the floor for their first dance together, she felt every eye upon them, but cared only for the way Adam looked at her, as if she were the only woman in the room. "You're a fine dancer, Mr. Caldwell," she commented as he guided her smoothly through a waltz. "For someone who claims not to attend socials." He smiled, the expression reaching all the way to his eyes. "My mother insisted all her sons learn properly. Said no child of hers would shuffle around a dance floor like a bear with sore paws." The image made Abigail laugh, drawing curious glances from nearby dancers. "She sounds like a remarkable woman." She was, Adam agreed, a hint of old sadness in his voice. "You remind me of her sometimes, your determination, your resilience." "I would have liked to meet her," Abigail said softly. Adam's hand tightened slightly at her waist. "She would have adored you." The words hung between them, another step toward deeper feelings neither had yet fully expressed. As winter slowly released its grip on the land, giving way to the first tentative signs of spring, Abigail found herself increasingly certain of her feelings for Adam. What had begun as gratitude and admiration had deepened into genuine affection and, she finally admitted to herself, love. She saw in him everything Edwin had lacked: consistency, integrity, and a depth of character that remained steady regardless of circumstances. Yet she held back from declaring herself, uncertain whether enough time had passed since Edwin's death for such a declaration to be proper, and wary of rushing into another relationship without complete clarity about her own heart. Adam, true to his word, remained patient, though Abigail sometimes caught a look in his eyes that spoke of deeper feelings carefully restrained. He continued his thoughtful gestures, leaving wildflowers as they began to bloom in the spring meadows, sharing books he thought she might enjoy, finding excuses to spend time in her company without pressing for more than she was ready to give. It was Mrs. Harrington, surprisingly, who finally broached the subject one afternoon in early April as she and Abigail prepared lists for the spring supply order. "You care for him," the older woman said abruptly, setting down her pencil and fixing Abigail with a direct gaze. "Caldwell, I mean." Abigail felt her cheeks warm, but didn't deny it. "Yes, I do. And he cares for you." That much is evident to anyone with eyes. Mrs. Harrington leaned back in her chair. So, what's holding you back? The question, posed so directly, caught Abigail off guard. I'm not sure it's been long enough since Edwin. Nonsense, Mrs. Harrington interrupted crisply. Your husband abandoned you before his death, from what I understand. And while propriety has its place, so does common sense. Her expression softened slightly. Life is short, Mrs. Turner, particularly out here. When you find someone worthy of your affection, it's foolish to waste time on artificial constraints. Abigail considered the older woman's words, recognizing the wisdom in them. You're right, she admitted. It's not really about time or propriety. It's about fear. Fear of what? Of making another mistake. Of trusting the wrong person again. Abigail looked down at her hands. Of losing myself in someone else's dreams instead of building my own. Mrs. Harrington nodded slowly, understanding in her eyes. Those are reasonable concerns. But ask yourself this. Is Caldwell anything like your former husband? Has he given you any reason to doubt his character or intentions? No, Abigail replied without hesitation. He's nothing like Edwin. She searched for the right words. He's steady, reliable. He listens when I speak and respects my thoughts. And your dreams? Has he asked you to abandon them? Abigail shook her head. Actually, he encourages them. He gave me a journal at Christmas to write in. Says I have a gift with words. The memory brought a smile to her lips. Sounds to me like a man who sees you clearly and values what he sees, Mrs. Harrington observed. Such men are rare, Mrs. Turner. In my experience, when you find one, the wisest course is to hold on tight. The conversation stayed with Abigail in the days that followed, prompting deep reflection on her feelings for Adam and her vision for her own future. She had come west seeking adventure and independence, yet found herself dependent on Edwin in ways that had ultimately left her vulnerable when he abandoned their shared dream. With Adam, she sensed the possibility of a different kind of partnership, one based on mutual respect and support rather than dependency. Her opportunity to speak with him came unexpectedly one evening in mid-April. Spring had arrived in earnest, with wildflowers carpeting the meadows and new grass greening the hillsides. Adam had been away for 3 days, riding the boundaries of the ranch's northern pastures to check fencing before the cattle were moved for spring grazing. Abigail was gathering eggs from the henhouse when she heard hoofbeats and looked up to see Adam riding toward the barn, his tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. Without conscious decision, she found herself walking to meet him, drawn by an urgency she didn't try to analyze. Abigail, he greeted her with evident pleasure as he dismounted. This is a welcome sight after 3 days of my own cooking. Was the ride successful? She asked, noting the weariness in his posture despite his smile. Mostly. Found some fencing down near the North Creek that'll need repair before we move the herd, but otherwise everything's in good shape. He began unsaddling his horse, his movements practiced and efficient despite his fatigue. How have things been here? Busy as usual, she replied. Clara's taken ill with a spring cold, so I've been managing the kitchen alone. And Mrs. Harrington has decided we need to do a complete inventory of the linens, which apparently haven't been properly counted since 1872. Adam chuckled, the sound warming her even from several feet away. Sounds like you've had your hands full. I have, but Abigail hesitated, suddenly uncertain how to proceed with what she had impulsively decided to say. Adam, could we talk? When you've settled your horse, I mean. Somewhere private. He paused in his task, studying her face with sudden seriousness. Of course. Give me 10 minutes to take care of Thunder here and get cleaned up a bit. True to his word, Adam appeared at the kitchen door exactly 10 minutes later, his face freshly washed and his hair damp from a quick grooming. The kitchen was empty, Clara's illness having sent her to bed early, and the evening meal long since finished. Is everything all right? He asked, concern evident in his voice as he took the chair she offered at the kitchen table. "Yes, everything's fine," Abigail assured him, sitting across from him with her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their slight trembling. "I've just been doing a lot of thinking while you were away." Adam waited patiently, his steady gaze giving her courage to continue. "When Edwin left me," she began, "and even after I learned of his death, I thought perhaps the life I wanted, a true partnership, a home filled with love and purpose, wasn't meant for me. That I had had my chance and lost it through some failure of judgment or character." She drew a deep breath, holding his gaze. "But these past months with you have shown me that isn't true. That what I had with Edwin wasn't a true partnership at all, but a doomed attempt to force together two people with fundamentally different dreams." Adam remained silent, though his eyes never left her face, reflecting an intensity of focus that gave her the courage to continue. "What I'm trying to say, perhaps not very elegantly, is that I care for you, Adam.
Deeply.
In a way I've never cared for anyone before." The words, once started, flowed more easily. "You've shown me what it means to be truly seen and valued, not for what I can provide or endure, but for who I am." A smile began to form at the corners of Adam's mouth, warming his entire expression. "Abigail Turner," he said softly, "are you courting me now?" The unexpected humor broke the tension, and Abigail found herself laughing. "I suppose I am, in my own clumsy way." Adam reached across the table, taking her hands in his larger ones. "There's nothing clumsy about a woman brave enough to speak her heart." His thumbs traced gentle circles on her wrists. "And since we're speaking plainly, I should tell you that I've been in love with you since that day we rode to your homestead." The directness of his declaration took her breath away. "That long?" He nodded, his eyes holding hers with unwavering certainty. "That long. Maybe even before that. Maybe from the moment you stood on your porch with an axe hidden behind your skirts, determined to face whatever came alone if you had to." Abigail felt tears prick at her eyes, moved beyond words by the depth of feeling in his voice and the realization that he had truly seen her from the very beginning. "I love you too," she whispered, the words both terrifying and liberating as they left her lips. "I think I have for some time, but I was afraid to admit it, even to myself." "And now?" Adam asked, his voice hushed as if fearing to break the spell of the moment. "Now I'm still afraid," she admitted with a small laugh, "but not of loving you. I'm afraid of how much I want this us, and what that means." Adam rose from his chair, still holding her hands, and drew her gently to her feet. Standing before her, he released one hand to brush a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her heart ache. "What it means," he said softly, "is that we've both been given a second chance at happiness. If you'll have me, Abigail Turner, I promise to spend every day making sure you never regret taking that chance." "Is that a proposal, Adam Caldwell?" she asked, her voice steady despite the rapid beating of her heart. "It is," he confirmed, his eyes never leaving hers. "Not as formal as you deserve, perhaps, but sincere as the sunrise. I love you, Abigail. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Abigail thought of all she had endured to reach this point, the hardships, the abandonment, the grief, and the slow rebuilding of her life and self. Yet none of it seemed wasted now, for it had led her here, to this man and this moment. "Yes," she said simply, her heart too full for elaborate speech. "Yes, I will marry you, Adam." His smile was like sunlight breaking through clouds as he drew her gently into his arms. When his lips met hers, soft and questioning at first, then with growing certainty as she responded, Abigail felt as though something long broken within her was finally being made whole. The news of their engagement spread quickly through the ranch, met with universal approval. Mr. Harrington insisted on hosting a proper celebration dinner, complete with champagne ordered specially from Butte. Mrs. Harrington, in a rare display of sentimentality, presented Abigail with a family heirloom, a beautiful lace tablecloth, to start your home properly. Clara was beside herself with excitement, immediately volunteering to help with wedding preparations and peppering Abigail with questions about her dress, the ceremony, and whether she would continue working in the kitchen after she was married. "Of course I'll keep cooking," Abigail assured her, though perhaps with some adjustments to accommodate married life. Those adjustments became clearer when Mr. Harrington called Adam and Abigail into his study one evening about a week after their engagement was announced. "I've been considering the future of this ranch," he began without preamble, seated behind his imposing oak desk. "I'm not getting any younger, and expansion requires fresh eyes and strong backs." He leaned forward, hands clasped before him. "Caldwell, you've proven yourself a dozen times over these past years. I trust your judgment and your integrity, which is why I'm offering you a new position, ranch manager, with expanded responsibilities and a share in the profits." Adam's surprise was evident. "Sir, I'm honored, but let me finish," Harrington continued. "Part of this arrangement would include use of the old foreman's house, the one at the east edge of the property. It needs work, but it's solid, with 3 bedrooms and good water access." His gaze moved to include Abigail. "Room enough for a family to grow, if that's in your plans." Abigail felt her cheeks warm at the implication, though the thought of children with Adam filled her with joy rather than apprehension. "Mrs. Turner," Harrington addressed her directly, "your position would evolve as well. Rather than daily kitchen duties, you'd oversee the domestic staff for the entire ranch, hiring, training, organizing. Margaret's been wanting to reduce her responsibilities in that area for some time." The offer was generous beyond expectation, not just employment, but a true stake in the ranch's future and a home of their own. Abigail looked at Adam, seeing her own wonder reflected in his expression. "We're deeply grateful, Mr. Harrington," she said. "It's more than we could have hoped for." "It's well earned," Harrington replied matter-of-factly. "Both of you. And selfishly motivated on my part. Want to keep my best people." He smiled, a rare enough occurrence to be notable. "Besides, I've developed a taste for your cooking, Mrs. Turner. Be ashamed to lose that." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity as wedding preparations coincided with their move to the foreman's house. As Mr. Harrington had warned, the building needed considerable work: new chinking between the logs, repairs to the roof, a thorough cleaning after standing empty for several years. But the structure was sound, with large windows that filled the rooms with light and a wide porch that wrapped around 2 sides, offering views of both the main ranch compound and the distant mountains. Adam spent every spare moment working on renovations, often joined by other ranch hands who volunteered their assistance. Abigail, meanwhile, divided her time between her kitchen duties and preparing the house for their occupation, selecting furniture from the ranch's storage, sewing curtains and linens, and planning the arrangement of their combined possessions. They decided on a June wedding, when the meadows would be full of wildflowers and the weather reliable enough for an outdoor celebration. The ceremony would be held at the ranch, with the local minister officiating and guests from neighboring properties and the town invited to join the festivities afterward. As the day approached, Abigail found herself reflecting on the extraordinary journey that had brought her to this point. Just over a year ago, she had stood in her isolated cabin watching Edwin ride away, convinced her dreams of happiness had departed with him. Now she was preparing to begin a new life with a man whose steadfast love had restored not only her faith in marriage, but in her own worth and capabilities. The evening before the wedding, Adam found her on the porch of their soon-to-be home, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in shades of gold and pink. He joined her silently, his presence beside her as comforting as a warm blanket on a cold night. "Having second thoughts?" he asked after a moment, a teasing note in his voice though his eyes held a hint of genuine question. Abigail shook her head, smiling up at him. "Not a single one. I was just thinking about how much has changed in a year. How much I've changed. Adam nodded thoughtfully. Life has a way of taking unexpected turns. When I rode out to your homestead that day, I was just doing my job, following up on a business arrangement. He took her hand, his thumb tracing her palm in a gesture that had become familiar and cherished. Had no idea I was riding toward my future. Your future looked rather desperate at the time, Abigail remarked with a small laugh. A woman with an empty pantry and a woodpile that wouldn't last a month. I saw more than that, Adam said softly. I saw courage, determination, a strength that had nothing to do with physical power. He brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her fingers. I saw you, Abigail Turner, and I've been seeing clearer ever since. The simple declaration, spoken with such evident sincerity, brought tears to Abigail's eyes. How is it possible to be this happy, she whispered. After everything, how can life offer such a gift? Adam drew her into his arms, his embrace warm and secure. Maybe it's not despite everything, but because of it, he suggested. Maybe we had to experience the hardships to recognize the blessing when it came. As the last light faded from the sky and the first stars began to appear, Abigail rested her head against Adam's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Tomorrow they would stand before their friends and neighbors to pledge their lives to one another. Tomorrow would begin their official journey as husband and wife. But in all the ways that truly mattered, their journey had begun months ago on a cold autumn day when a lonely, desperate woman found unexpected kindness from a stranger who saw her worth when she had forgotten it herself. From hunger to abundance, from cold to warmth, from isolation to belonging, the transformation of Abigail's life seemed almost too perfect to be real. Yet as Adam's arms tightened around her, solid and undeniably present, she knew that this was no dream, but a hard-won reality. A second chance at happiness, built not on youthful fantasies, but on mutual respect, shared values, and a love that had grown steadily from the fertile soil of kindness, understanding, and genuine care. As the evening breeze carried the scent of wildflowers and the promise of summer, Abigail closed her eyes and offered a silent prayer of gratitude for the unexpected path that had led her home at last. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect, with a blue sky unmarked by clouds and a gentle breeze that carried the scent of pine and wildflowers across the ranch. Abigail woke in the main house, where she had spent her final night as a single woman in her old room above the kitchen. Clara was already up, practically bouncing with excitement as she helped Abigail prepare for the day. You're going to be the most beautiful bride ever, the young girl declared as she carefully arranged Abigail's hair, weaving in sprigs of baby's breath and blue forget-me-nots that matched her eyes. Mr. Caldwell is going to fall over when he sees you. Abigail laughed, her own excitement bubbling just beneath the surface. Let's hope he remains upright, at least until after the ceremony. Mrs. Harrington appeared in the doorway, carrying a large box. Almost ready? She asked, her usual brisk manner softened by the occasion. I have something for you. She set the box on the bed and carefully lifted the lid, revealing a beautiful wedding dress of ivory satin and lace. Abigail gasped, reaching out to touch the delicate fabric with reverent fingers. It's exquisite, she breathed. But I was planning to wear my blue dress with the new lace collar. This was my daughter's, Mrs. Harrington explained, a hint of old sadness in her eyes. She wore it when she married, before they moved to San Francisco. When I wrote to tell her of your engagement, she insisted you should have it. A small smile touched the older woman's lips, said it brought her luck, and that every bride deserves to feel like a princess on her wedding day. Tears pricked Abigail's eyes at the unexpected generosity. I don't know what to say. It's too much nonsense. Mrs. Harrington cut her off briskly, though her eyes were kind. It's gathering dust in that box, and Elizabeth has no daughters to pass it to. It would please her and me to see it worn again. With Clara's help, Abigail donned the beautiful gown, which fit as if it had been made for her. The ivory satin skirt fell in graceful folds to the floor, while the bodice was overlaid with delicate lace and tiny pearl buttons that ran down the back. The effect, when she finally stood before the mirror, was breathtaking. "Oh, Mrs. Turner," Clara sighed dreamily. "You look like an angel." "Indeed you do, Mrs." Harrington agreed, uncharacteristic emotion making her voice slightly husky. "Caldwell is a fortunate man." A knock at the door interrupted the moment. It was Mr. Harrington, come to escort Abigail to the ceremony, which would be held in the garden behind the main house where a flower-covered arbor had been erected for the occasion. "The guests are assembled, and your groom is looking more nervous than I've ever seen him," he announced with a chuckle. "Though that'll change when he gets a look at you." He offered his arm with old-fashioned gallantry. "Ready, my dear?" Abigail took a deep breath, steadying herself for this momentous transition. "More than ready, Mr. Harrington. Thank you for everything you and Mrs. Harrington have done for us." "It's been our pleasure," he assured her, patting her hand where it rested on his arm. "Now, let's not keep that young man waiting any longer. I believe he's been patient enough." The garden was transformed, with ribbons and flowers adorning every available surface and rows of chairs arranged to create an aisle leading to the arbor where Adam waited with the minister. Nearly 100 guests had gathered, all the ranch hands and their families, neighbors from surrounding properties, and townspeople who had come to know and respect both Abigail and Adam during their time in the territory. As the small group of musicians began to play, and Abigail appear at the end of the aisle on Mr. Harrington's arm, a collective murmur of appreciation rose from the assembled guests. But Abigail had eyes only for Adam, standing tall and handsome in a new black suit, his expression transforming from nervous anticipation to wonder as he caught sight of her. The walk down the aisle seemed both eternal and instantaneous. Then Mr. Harrington was placing her hand in Adam's, and she was looking up into the blue eyes that had become her home and harbor. "You are so beautiful," Adam whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I can hardly believe this is real." "Believe it," she whispered back, squeezing his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." The ceremony itself was simple and heartfelt. They had written their own vows, promising not just love and fidelity but partnership, respect, and unwavering support through whatever challenges life might bring. When Adam slipped the gold band onto her finger, a ring that had belonged to his grandmother, passed down through generations, Abigail felt the rightness of it settle into her very bones. "By the authority vested in me," the minister proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife. What God has joined together, let no man put asunder." He smiled at Adam. "You may kiss your bride." Adam needed no second invitation. Drawing Abigail into his arms, he kissed her with a tenderness that conveyed more eloquently than words all the love and promise contained within their union. The guests erupted in cheers and applause, but for that perfect moment, they existed in a world of their own, making a world built on second chances and unexpected blessings. The celebration that followed lasted well into the night, with a feast laid out on long tables, music for dancing, and enough champagne to ensure high spirits all around. Abigail and Adam moved among their guests, accepting congratulations and well wishes from all quarters. "Mrs. Caldwell," Adam murmured in her ear during a rare moment alone as they watched the dancing from the edge of the gathering. "How does it sound to your ears?" Abigail leaned into his side, savoring the solid warmth of him. "Like music," she replied honestly. "Like belonging." As the evening drew to a close, they slipped away from the festivities to begin the short journey to their new home, where they would spend their first night as husband and wife. The house was warm and welcoming, with lamps lit in the windows and a small fire burning in the hearth of the main room. Clara's work, Abigail suspected, or perhaps Mrs. Harrington's final gesture of approval. Adam paused at the threshold, turning to Abigail with a smile that made her heart skip. "Tradition says I should carry you across," he said, his eyes dancing with happiness. "If my bride has no objection?" "None whatsoever," she laughed, and then gave a small squeal of surprise as he swept her effortlessly into his arms. He carried her across the threshold with careful reverence, setting her gently on her feet in the center of what would be their home for years to come. In the warm glow of the lamps, Abigail looked around at the space they had prepared to gather the comfortable furniture, the curtains she had sewn, the bookshelves Adam had built to hold their growing collection. "It's perfect," she said softly. "Everything I ever dreamed of, but didn't dare hope for." Adam drew her into his arms, his expression serious despite the joy of the day. "I make you this promise, Abigail Caldwell," he said, his voice low and intent. "As long as I draw breath, you will never again know hunger or cold or abandonment. This table will always have food, this hearth will always have fire, and you will always, always have my heart." Tears filled Abigail's eyes at the simple, powerful pledge. "And you will have mine," she whispered, "now and always." Their kiss sealed the promise, a promise that would be tested by the challenges of frontier life, but never broken, a love that had begun with an act of kindness on a cold autumn day and would sustain them through all the seasons to come. 5 years later, Abigail stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Adam taught their 4-year-old son, James, to ride his first pony. The little boy's laughter rang out across the yard, matched by Adam's deeper chuckle as he guided the gentle animal in a circle. Their daughter, Elizabeth, named for Mrs. Harrington's daughter who had gifted Abigail her wedding dress, sat on a blanket nearby, her 2-year-old curiosity focused intently on a butterfly that had landed on a nearby wildflower. Her dark curls and blue eyes were mirror images of her father's, while James had inherited Abigail's honey-brown hair and thoughtful expression. The Barcross Ranch had prospered under Adam's management and Mr. Harrington's continued guidance. What had once been a sizable operation was now one of the most successful ranches in the territory, with expanded herds, additional acreage, and a reputation for fair dealing and quality cattle that brought buyers from as far away as Chicago. Abigail's role had evolved as well. While she no longer handled the daily cooking for the ranch hands, she oversaw a small staff that managed the domestic operations for the growing compound. She had also, with Mrs. Harrington's encouragement, begun writing articles for various women's magazines and agricultural journals, sharing insights about frontier life and ranching operations from a woman's perspective. The journal Adam had given her that first Christmas was now filled with stories, observations, and memories, some of which had found their way into print. She was currently working on a more ambitious project, a full-length book about women's experiences in the West, combining her own story with those of other women she had met during her time in Montana. As she watched her family, the husband who had restored her faith in love, and the children who were the embodiment of that love, Abigail felt a profound sense of gratitude for the twisting path that had led her here. The abandoned homestead, the desperate winter, the chance encounter with a kind-hearted cowboy, all pieces of a journey that had seemed tragic in the moment but had ultimately delivered her to this place of abundance and joy. Adam looked up from his lesson with James, catching her eye across the yard. His smile, still as warm and genuine as it had been on that first day, conveyed without words all that lay between them, the shared struggles, the triumphs, the deep and abiding love that had only strengthened with each passing year. "Mama, look," James called excitedly. "I'm riding all by myself." Adam had stepped back slightly, allowing the boy a moment of independence while remaining close enough to intervene if needed. His protective instincts, so evident from their first meeting, extended now to their children, though he balanced that protection with encouragement of their growing capabilities. "I see you, sweetheart," Abigail called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Pride swelled in her chest as she watched her son's face light up with accomplishment. These moments, these ordinary, Extraordinary moments of family life were the true measure of the riches she had found since that day when her first husband had walked away, leaving her to face winter alone. From that bitter cold had come the warmest blessing of her life, a man who had not only filled her table but her heart, a love that had transformed emptiness into fullness, and a future brighter than any she could have imagined in her darkest hours. As twilight began to settle over the ranch and Adam gathered their children to come inside for supper, Abigail stepped from the porch to meet them, arms outstretched to receive Elizabeth's sleepy weight while James chattered excitedly about his writing lesson. "Hungry?" she asked her family, leading the way toward the door where golden lamplight spilled out to welcome them. "Starving," Adam confirmed, his free arms slipping around her waist as they crossed the threshold together. "Something smells amazing." "Wild game stew," she replied, leaning into his solid presence. "With those biscuits you like." His smile was tender as he pressed a kiss to her temple. "You always know exactly what we need." "And you," she said softly for his ears alone, "always make sure we have it. In every way that matters." Around them, their home glowed with warmth and welcome, the table set for the evening meal, the hearth crackling with a cheerful fire, the rooms filled with the evidence of a life well lived and richly blessed. Outside, the Montana sky deepened toward night, stars emerging one by one to witness another day's end at the Bar Cross Ranch, where a woman once abandoned had found not just shelter, but a love strong enough to weather any storm and warm enough to banish even the coldest memories. And as she moved about the kitchen, preparing to feed the family that was her greatest joy, Abigail knew with bone-deep certainty that this love, this life, this second chance was what she had been seeking all along, the true adventure that had called her west so many years ago. Not the conquest of untamed land, but the discovery of a place where her heart could finally, fully, come home.